The city of Kufa was heavy with a silence that spoke louder than any battle cry. The air, usually filled with the sounds of traders and poets, now moved with whispers, dangerous, bitter, secretive whispers. In the heart of this uneasy city stood Imam Hasan, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the son of Imam Ali, and the rightful leader of a fractured ummah. After the martyrdom of Imam Ali in the Mosque of Kufa, the world had shifted again, not by tremor, but by treachery. Imam Hasan stood at the helm of a broken people. The sword of his father still echoed in the walls of Kufa, but his own path was not forged in iron. It would be carved through layers of deceit, political maneuvering, and a nation unwilling to honor truth. His rule, brief as it was, became a tale of patience in the face of betrayal. The pledge to him came fast, but not deep. Tens of thousands in Kufa gave their allegiance after the martyrdom of his father, but their tongues were faster than their hearts. Many were weary of war after decades of battle. Others still hoped for the spoils of conquest, or watched for the rising power of Muawiyah in the distant capital of Sham. They pledged, yes, but they also doubted, questioned, and waited for whoever offered a stronger coin. From the darkened halls of Damascus, Muawiyah ibn Abu Sufyan watched with cunning eyes. He, the governor of Syria and an old rival of Imam Ali, had ambitions far beyond governance. He sought to lay claim over all of Islam, not with truth, but with power. The martyrdom of Imam Ali had left a gap, and he knew exactly how to fill it. Letters began to move like venom through the veins of the empire. Muawiyah sent gold and promises to the commanders of Imam Hasan's army, corrupting them one by one. He offered lands, silver, governorships, and for some, only survival. The battle for leadership was no longer one of swords clashing on the battlefield, but hearts being bought in secret chambers. Imam Hasan, despite his youth, saw it all. He read the signs in the eyes of his generals, the hesitation in their voices, the late-night movements of men who should have been sleeping. Still, he remained calm. Like his grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his father before him, he believed that victory was not always seen in conquest, but sometimes in the endurance of truth. He addressed the people from the pulpit of Kufa, his words gentle yet firm, full of sorrow and warning. You pledged to me, not because I sought it, but because truth demanded it. If you abandon me now, you abandon the blood of the Prophet. If you yield to Muawiyah, you yield to a kingdom built on deceit, not divine guidance. But the people were growing restless. Rumors swirled that Muawiyah was preparing a massive army. Fear spread like wildfire, and the loyalty of Kufa began to crack. Then came the ultimate betrayal. Two of Imam Hasan's closest commanders, Ubaidullah ibn Abbas and Qais ibn Sa'd, led their respective wings of the army toward the battlefield near Madain. But in the dead of night, gold reached Ubaidullah's tent. In exchange for wealth and a promise of a high-ranking position under Muawiyah, he deserted, not silently, but by publicly declaring allegiance to the Syrian ruler. Half of Imam Hasan's army, seeing their general turn, followed blindly, unaware they were walking into the mouth of hypocrisy. Qais ibn Sa'd, loyal and fierce, held his ground and wrote urgently to Imam Hasan. The men are wavering. Rumors are that you have made a treaty already. Some say you are in secret talks with Muawiyah. We are losing them, not to fear but to confusion. Imam Hasan knew he was fighting an invisible war. The battlefield was not in Madain or Sham, but in the hearts of the Muslims, and that battlefield had already begun to collapse. Then came the final blow. As Imam Hasan led a smaller group of troops to stabilize the front lines, an assassin, hidden in the folds of loyalty, approached. He was not an enemy soldier or a known conspirator. He was one of their own, a man from Kufa masked by the cloth of allegiance, hiding the blade of rebellion. As the Imam passed through the ranks, the assassin lunged forward and drove a dagger into his thigh. Blood soaked his cloak. The camp erupted in screams. Soldiers scattered in confusion. The Imam collapsed, not from the wound alone, but from the realization that his enemies were not just across borders, they were among his own. He was taken to safety. The wound was deep and the pain sharp, yet his face remained calm. Those who surrounded him later would say his silence after the attack was louder than any cry. The message was clear. This was not a battle he would win with the sword. It was a battle of preservation, of truth, of legacy, of sacrifice. Soon after, Muawiyah sent emissaries with a proposed treaty. It was a calculated move. He had seen Imam Hasan's army fracture. He had bought off enough commanders. And now, with the Imam wounded and betrayed by his own, he offered peace, or what appeared to be peace. The document was brought before Imam Hasan. It promised that Muawiyah would rule as a temporary caretaker, not as a caliph by right. It declared that upon Muawiyah's death, leadership would return to Imam Hasan. It ensured that no harm would come to the family of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It pledged that the Quran and Sunnah would be the foundation of governance. The Imam studied it. He understood Muawiyah's tongue, a tongue that could promise the sky while planning the abyss. But he also knew that the people would not fight. They had grown tired, they had been bought or threatened, or both. To lead a people unwilling to stand was not leadership, it was martyrdom without message. He signed. The ink dried on a treaty, written not with faith, but with grief. And as he signed, he looked not to the parchment, but toward the unseen, to the silent angels who witnessed, to the souls of the righteous who would understand, and to the future where truth would return. In crimson flags and thirsty plains, Kufa rejoiced. The people cheered that war was over. Muawiyah paraded the treaty as a triumph, but Imam Hasan's heart knew otherwise. This was not peace, it was the beginning of betrayal, a poison not yet swallowed, but already prepared. And somewhere in the shadows of the Umayyad court, a plan was already being poured, not in ink, but in a cup. A treaty. Written in ashes, the sun no longer rose gently over Kufa. It beat down harshly upon a city cloaked in silence, a silence that came not from peace, but from guilt. The people who once cried allegiance to Imam Hasan now walked. With bowed heads, their voices reduced to murmurs of regret. The treaty had been signed, and though the ink on the parchment had dried, the blood in their hearts remained unsettled. From the pulpit, Imam Hasan had addressed them again, his body still recovering from the wound inflicted by the hand of a supposed supporter. His words were not of anger, but of sorrow. "You desired peace," he said, voice soft but resolute, "and I gave it to you, not because I trusted the man you fear, but because I saw no swords raised when my blood was shed. If you could not protect me from the knife, how would you protect the cause of truth?" He did not name Muawiyah, but the sting was clear. The people listened in uneasy stillness. They had watched their imams spill blood, not in battle but in betrayal, and still they lacked the courage to act. Now Muawiyah's name was spoken openly in the streets, and the soldiers of Sham had begun to arrive, tall, armed, and arrogant. Stepping into Kufa like conquerors of a war they had never fought. The caliphate was now in Muawiyah's hands. The treaty was clear. He was to govern not as a true caliph, but as a placeholder. Imam Hasan's rights, the rights of Ahl-e-Bait, and the rights of the Muslims were to be honored. But Muawiyah, son of Abu Sufyan, had never intended to honor the treaty. The moment he stepped into Kufa, he stood on the very same pulpit where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had once delivered guidance, where Imam Ali had thundered against injustice, and where Imam Hasan had pleaded for loyalty. Muawiyah stood with the arrogance of a king, not a servant of the Ummah. "I did not fight you," he declared publicly, "so that you may pray or fast better. I fought you to rule over you." The words struck like thunder. The veil was lifted. Whatever illusions the people of Kufa had maintained were now shattered. The treaty, once hailed as salvation, now burned in their conscience. But the people remained silent, too guilty to protest, too cowardly to resist. In the months that followed, Imam Hasan withdrew from the political life of the capital. He no longer spoke from the pulpit, nor commanded armies. Instead, he turned to Medina, the city of his grandfather, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There, he lived in quiet dignity, surrounded by those who still loved the Prophet's family with unshaken hearts. Yet, even in retreat, Imam Hasan remained a thorn in Muawiyah's side. Muawiyah could not bear the existence of a man whose lineage alone reminded the world of the difference between authority by force and leadership by divine right. Imam Hasan's presence in Medina was a silent revolt, a living testament to the injustice that now governed the Ummah. Spies were dispatched, informants were planted, and slowly Muawiyah began to plot what swords could not achieve, the slow poisoning of hearts, minds, and eventually the body of Imam Hasan himself. It began with whispers that Imam Hasan was preparing to reclaim the caliphate, that he was amassing secret supporters, that his silence was merely the calm before another storm. These lies were crafted carefully and spread strategically, not to the people of Medina, but to those closest to Imam Hasan. And among those closest to him was one who bore his trust, but not his loyalty. Her name was Jada bint Ashath. She was of noble blood, the daughter of Ashath ibn Qais, a man whose loyalty had always been questioned since the days of Imam Ali. Her marriage to Imam Hasan had been a matter of diplomacy more than love. Imam Hasan, like his father before him, often bore alliances for the greater good, even when the soul was sacrificed for the sake of unity. Muawiyah knew her ambition. He knew that within her lay the seeds of desire for power, for recognition, for a place in history greater than that of a wife in the shadows. He wrote to her directly, sending secret messengers with honeyed promises. "Poison your husband," the letter said, "and I shall marry you to my son, Yazid." The offer was laced with gold, titles, and the illusion of queenship. She hesitated, not because of conscience, but because of fear. Yet fear can be conquered when greed is greater. She accepted. The poison was prepared, not a sudden killer, but one that would sink slowly into the body, crippling it day by day. She would serve it in a drink, a cup she claimed was made with saffron and healing herbs. The Imam, gentle in trust and unaware of the storm in her heart, drank. The pain was not instant, but it was relentless. His body began to weaken. His skin paled. His stomach burned. He knew the signs. The Prophet, peace be upon him, had been poisoned. Imam Ali had been struck with a blade, and now Imam Hasan bore the mark of martyrdom through the silent death of betrayal. But he did not accuse her, not in anger, not with shouting. He only said, "You have done what you were ordered to do, but know that Muawiyah will never give you Yazid. He only used your hand to end what he feared most." Her silence was answer enough. The illness spread. Through him, his body, once strong, now trembled. His walk turned into a slow, painful shuffle. Blood began to pour from his mouth in the nights, and those who came to visit him would find him in prayer, not asking for death to pass, but for the Ummah to wake from its blindness. In his final days, he requested his brother Hussain to come. "Close. This world," he whispered, "is not the place of justice. Our grandfather was driven to tears, our father was struck in prayer, and now I, poisoned by one who sat beside me, know that truth does not always wear a crown, but it survives, if not in rule, then in remembrance. He did not cry for power. He did not mourn his position. He mourned the state of a nation that once followed the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, but now chased gold under the flag of deceit. Before his final breath, he made a request that he be buried beside his grandfather, the Prophet, in Medina. But even in death, his enemies would deny him peace. As his funeral procession moved toward the grave of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they were stopped. Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, stood at the entrance, supported by soldiers. Of Muawiyah, she refused his burial beside the messenger of God. "Is it not enough," she said, "that you troubled us in life? Will you trouble us in death?" The words fell like ice. Imam Hussain, heartbroken but composed, withdrew the body. "No," he said, "we will not let blood be spilled over his grave. Let him rest where he can rest in peace." The body of Imam Hasan was taken to Al-Baqi, the graveyard of Medina. There, among the forgotten and the faithful, the second Imam of Islam was buried. But before the dust could cover him, another betrayal struck. Arrows rained down on the funeral. Muawiyah's forces, bitter to the end, had ordered the attack. The shroud of the Imam was pierced, blood staining his already lifeless body. Still there were no curses, no war cry, only tears. And thus, the one who resembled the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in face, in voice, and in heart, left the world not with a sword in hand, but with poison in his veins. He was 38 years old. He was the peace that no one deserved. He was the silence that still screams through history. The silence that screamed Medina had returned to its rhythm. The call to prayer still echoed. From its minarets, children still played in its narrow alleys, and the mosque of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, still stood tall. But the air was heavier, as if the desert itself mourned the passing of a soul too gentle for the times. Imam Hasan, the eldest grandson of the Prophet, had been buried not beside his grandfather as he had wished, but in the graveyard of Al-Baqi. And though the city moved on, the soil had witnessed a betrayal that would forever echo in the chambers of Islamic history. It was not just the act of poisoning or the refusal of his burial beside the Prophet, peace be upon him, or even the raining of arrows upon his funeral. It was the silence of the Ummah that hurt most. The same people who had pledged allegiance to him, who had promised to uphold truth and support the family of the Prophet, had chosen convenience over courage. His brother, Imam Hussain, stood by the grave in Al-Baqi longer than anyone else. He did not weep loudly, but the grief in his eyes bore the weight of generations. He kissed the grave, not merely as a farewell, but as a vow. He would not forget. The poison that took his brother's life would not end their mission. It had only begun a new chapter, one that would eventually lead to a land called Karbala. Back in Damascus, Muawiyah sat upon a throne carved not from wood, but from the shattered promises of the Ummah. The death of Imam Hasan was no accident to him. It was a necessary move in the chessboard of politics. With Imam Ali martyred, and now Imam Hasan dead, only Imam Hussain remained. Muawiyah knew that Hussein's silence was not submission. It was waiting. But Muawiyah was not content with power alone. He wanted to change the very soul of Islam. He wanted to crown his son, Yazid, a man known more for indulgence than leadership, as his successor. It was not merely a shift in politics. It was the beginning of monarchy in the name of religion. The caliphate, once a sacred trust, was becoming a dynasty. When Muawiyah first proposed Yazid's succession, it sparked outrage among the remaining companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the scholars of Medina, and especially among the lovers of Ahl-e-Bait. But Muawiyah silenced them with gold, threats, and exile. Imam Hasan's death had paved the way for Yazid's rise, and Muawiyah would make sure no one could stand in his path. In the private chambers of Medina, Imam Hussain gathered the few remaining loyal companions of his brother. They were men of wisdom, some old with white in their beards, others young but with fire in their hearts. Together, they remembered Imam Hasan, his patience, his smile, his refusal to curse even those who betrayed him. Why didn't he fight? To the end, one asked. He could have died on the battlefield like our father. Imam Hussain looked up, eyes reflecting the pain of both a brother and a witness to history. He fought, he replied, but not with the sword. He fought the disease that had eaten away at this ummah, the disease of hypocrisy, of betrayal masked as loyalty. He gave peace because the people no longer deserved the sword of justice. Then he added, "But peace does not last when the oppressor sharpens his blade." In the years that followed, Muawiyah ruled with a fist wrapped in silk. Outwardly, he portrayed himself as the custodian of Islam, while inwardly he worked to erase the memory of Ahl-e-Bait. He paid poets to sing praises of Yazid. He placed spies in the homes of the Prophet's family. He altered sermons so that even the mention of Imam Ali became a curse in many pulpits. He knew the influence of the Ahl-e-Bait could never be erased with war. It had to be suffocated over time. But the memory of Imam Hasan could not be erased. In the quiet gatherings of Medina, people would still recount his sermons. Mothers would whisper his name when praying over their children, and among the hearts of the faithful, the image of a gentle imam, poisoned by the very hand that had once poured his water, lived on as a symbol of injustice that wore the cloak of Islam. Jada, the wife who had betrayed him, was never married to Yazid. Muawiyah had lied. She had fulfilled her end of the deal, but betrayal breeds betrayal. After Imam Hasan's death, Muawiyah refused to even acknowledge her. She was left in silence, haunted by the Imam's last words. "He will never give you Yazid." And he never did. She died in disgrace, her story whispered as a cautionary tale of how the love of this world leads to the death of the soul. Years passed. The dynasty grew bold. Upon Muawiyah's death, Yazid was declared caliph, a declaration that turned the silent embers into roaring fire. Imam Hussain, watching from Medina, now knew that the time for patience had ended. If Imam Hasan had been the symbol of endurance, Imam Hussain would become the symbol of resistance. And so the journey to Karbala began. But even on the road to Karbala, the name of Imam Hasan echoed in every step. Hussain would look to the skies and remember his brother's warnings. He would whisper to his companions about the lessons of betrayal, of poisoned treaties, of the dangers of false peace. When the enemy forces surrounded him at Karbala, Hussain sent a message, not of war, but of truth, just as his brother had. And when the enemy denied him water, just as they had denied dignity to Imam Hasan, he remembered. When the children wept, when Ali Akbar rode to his death, when Abbas fell at the banks of the Euphrates, the shadow of Imam Hasan stood beside each tragedy, reminding the world that the war on truth had never ended. Even when Hussain stood alone on the battlefield, his family martyred, his back pierced, his voice never faltered. The lessons of his brother were etched in his soul. If Imam Hasan had taught the world how to die with dignity and silence, Imam Hussain showed how to die with honor in defiance. After Karbala, when the women and children were dragged as prisoners to the court of Yazid, Lady Zainab, daughter of Imam Ali and sister to both Hasan and Hussain, stood tall. She looked Yazid in the eye and declared, "You have done what you wished, but by Allah, you will never erase our remembrance." And indeed, the remembrance grew. In every corner of the Muslim world, the martyrdom of Imam Hasan became a story that hearts carried with quiet pain. His sacrifice, silent, slow, and unseen, had been just as great as the sword of Karbala. One was struck in the battlefield, the other died by betrayal in his own home, but both were sons of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and both died, upholding the truth. To this day, al-Baqi remains desecrated. The grave of Imam Hasan, once visited by thousands, now stands without a tomb, without a sign. But no stones can hide his legacy. His story is not carved in marble, it is carved in memory. It is remembered in the tears of the faithful. It is echoed in the pain of every oppressed soul. It is written not in books alone, but in the blood of those who stood for justice. The story of Imam Hasan is not a tale of defeat. It is a testament to the weight of leadership, the pain of betrayal, and the nobility of endurance. He gave up power not because he was weak, but because his people had become weak. He signed a treaty not because he trusted the enemy, but because he refused to let truth die in vain. He drank the poisoned cup knowing that history would uncover what the people of his time refused to see. And so, when we remember Imam Hasan, we remember the quiet resistance, the unspoken grief, the patience that thundered louder than war drums. He was not the Imam of conquest, he was the Imam of conscience, and long after kings and empires have faded into dust, his legacy and his poisoned cup still speaks. It says, "Truth does not die, it only waits, and then it returns."